Shana Tova. On Yom Kippur, in ancient times, the high priest modeled responsibility. He entered the inner sanctum of the temple and confessed his personal sins. After he had done his own confession, he then acknowledged the sins of the priests and leadership, and then, after that, the sins of the people as a whole. He began with himself and then expanded. After the confession, he placed his hands on a goat that would be sent off into the wilderness as a symbol of the people's desire to be rid of sin. The term for this goat was the scapegoat. And ironically, as time moved on, the term came to mean the exact opposite of what was originally intended. Instead of taking responsibility for personal and national wrongdoing, to scapegoat came to mean projecting your transgressions onto someone else and blaming them for your problems. One of humanity's most terrible examples of scapegoating is the Holocaust. Scapegoating is what enabled the Holocaust to be implemented. Scapegoating was at the heart of what occurred there and then, and what continues to happen now. My wife, Rabbi Julie Zupan, and I were privileged to travel to Poland this past summer on a Holocaust education trip led by our colleague, Rabbi Fred Gutman. We traveled with public school teachers, mostly from North Carolina, who were getting their continuing education training hours and who taught the Holocaust in some way, either through history, literature, or something else. They were a very thoughtful group. People asked me why I wanted to go, why we were hitching a ride with this trip. I didn't necessarily want to go. I needed to go. I have been teaching about the Holocaust for decades, but I've never gone to Poland, so it felt like a big gap in my Jewish and rabbinic experience. And even on the plane, I wasn't exactly sure why I was going. On the very first day upon arrival, I suddenly realized I was in Poland to witness and to pray. I wanted to be a witness at these sites of devastation and offer a prayer at each one. Upon my first day in Krakow, however, I struggled with which prayer I should say. Should I say El Malei Rachamim, the prayer that asks God to allow our souls to rest in peace, held in God's loving and eternal remembrance? Should I recite Mourner's Kaddish? But the tradition is to have a minyan for Kaddish. A minyan, a quorum of 10 Jews, is the critical mass you need to say certain prayers. The large majority of our group was not Jewish. We did not have a minyan. I decided to say Kaddish anyway. And as I was saying the words, I realized I did have a minyan. I felt them. Their spirits were all around me. Hauntingly, I felt called to say Kaddish everywhere I went. And so I did. I often said Kaddish several times a day at death camps, at the Warsaw Ghetto, at a wall of tombstones that was destroyed by the Nazis and made into a memorial because no one knows where they properly belong. I had very mixed feelings towards the Polish people. We met heroic Polish educators and activists who were trying to tell the truth about Polish collaboration during the Holocaust. We also met revisionists who falsify history and teach that the Polish people were the primary victims of the Nazis and should be lauded as heroes. During the Holocaust, when given the chance, many Polish people enthusiastically participated in pogroms and even did so in 1946, after the war had ended, when Jews were supposedly now safe. Anti-Semitism had been baked into the ground for centuries through church teachings and blood libels. The land was fertile for the death camps. But Poland today is divided between those who want to face this past honestly and those who do not or cannot. I can't help but wonder if the Polish people's current commendable efforts to help Ukrainian refugees is somehow psychologically rooted in an effort to right a past wrong. When we returned from the trip, the question I faced was, now, what am I going to do with this experience? And I can't help but see a disconnect between Holocaust education in the United States today and the current rise of anti-Semitism we face. 23 states require the teaching of the Holocaust in some fashion, and that number is growing. My trip with the teachers was part of that effort. At the same time, we also face an increase in anti-Semitic events. According to the Anti-Defamation League, anti-Semitic incidents in the US reached an all-time high last year with a total of 3,697 incidents of assault, harassment, and vandalism. This represents the largest number of incidents against Jews in the US recorded by the ADL since 1979. How can this be? How can the increase in Holocaust education and the rise of anti-Semitism both be true? Many of us have believed that educating people about the Holocaust will help bring down today's surge of anti-Semitism, but that's not necessarily so. The North Carolina teachers with whom Rabbi Zupan and I traveled are teaching about the Holocaust in their schools, but they're doing so sometimes under adverse circumstances. Along with books that are being banned, mostly regarding gender and racism, there are efforts to remove the graphic novel Mouse and Night by Elie Wiesel. One teacher related that anti-Semitism appears in their school district in a disguised form. In their middle school, Night was rejected because the themes were too adult. In their high school, Night was rejected because the language was too simplistic and didn't rise to high school level. The desired end result is obvious. Wiesel's Night won't be taught for any reason that can be found. Something anti-Semitic is going on. Writer Dara Horn recently wrote a provocative essay in The Atlantic entitled, "Is Holocaust Education Making Anti-Semitism Worse?" That is, Holocaust education in the United States is sometimes done badly. Badly done Holocaust education can reinforce stereotypes about Jews. Another common transgression is when the role of righteous Gentiles is overemphasized, and one might mistakenly conclude that every other house in Poland hid a Jewish family. Most disturbing to me, sometimes the Holocaust is taught as abstract genocide in general because other people were also targeted by the Nazis, like the Roma, homosexuals, and political prisoners. Now, these crimes occurred and are important, but the overwhelming majority of victims were Jews. We need to re-examine what the goals of Holocaust education are. Something is not working. Many people claim the goal is never again. However, depending upon who's speaking, never again can mean at least two things. Never again can mean never should there be a genocide against anyone again. This is the universalist approach, and unfortunately we have seen many more genocides since the Shoah. Never again can also mean never again will the Jewish people be powerless and unable to control our own fate. This is the particularistic approach and a reason to be Zionist. Both interpretations are necessary. But more often than not, we find in America that Holocaust education is folded into anti-bullying curricula. Don't be a bystander, be an upstander is the message. What acts of kindness can you do? Speak up when you see something wrong. While the phenomena of bullying and being a bystander certainly had their roles in how the Holocaust was carried out, and being kind is important, the political, racial, and systematic nature of anti-Semitism is much deeper than that. That's why I think we also need to talk about scapegoating. Not in replacement of the other lessons, but in addition to. Our communities need to comprehend how anti-Semitic scapegoating has worked specifically against the Jewish people, and then how it is applied to all who suffer from bigotry. Anti-Semitism is an act of projecting people's fears and sins onto the Jewish people, and is an object lesson in the worst of humanity. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught, some are guilty, all are responsible. Scapegoating of anyone is countered by meeting and getting to know real people and then standing in solidarity with them. We must be both particularistic about anti-Semitism and universal regarding bigotry. Hillel taught us this truth long ago. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? And we also need to teach positive examples of joyful Jewish life. That must be part of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We must be a part of that conversation in a positive way. What are Jewish beliefs and ethics? What do Jews really look and sound like in all of our diversity? What are our holidays and life cycle events? Present-day Jewish customs and celebrations need to be part of the curriculum, just like everyone else. If we are going to celebrate multiculturalism in the United States, we must be loud and proud about our Jewish identities. And I don't think the over-the-top movie, "You Are So Not Invited to My Bat Mitzvah," is going to do the job. The goals of never again in the universal sense and don't be a bystander are okay, but not enough. They don't address the rise in anti-Semitism today. They must be coupled with lessons on how scapegoating occurs, including the history of anti-Semitism and celebrations of Jewish life. If we don't, we are not going to defuse hatred of Jewish people, which has lost its stigma. I worry this might be too much to ask of our already overwhelmed teachers, but if we're going to mandate Holocaust education, we ought to do it as well as we can, and we ought to all pitch in and help out. I would like to conclude with a hopeful story. We were walking around the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, and we reached the final exhibit. At the conclusion, there were videos of Polish people who were looking into their ancestry, and guess what? They were discovering that they were partially Jewish. In other words, for the Poles, one of the messages of the museum is that the history of the Jewish people isn't necessarily about others. It could be about their heritage too. The question was asked, how many Jews are in Poland today? Our guide said, who knows? Jews were part of Poland for so many centuries that there was a lot of mixing. Am I part Jewish? She asked. Maybe. One conclusion from this can be, when scapegoating another, look in the mirror. If the book of Genesis teaches us anything, it is that we are all ultimately connected, going back to Adam, the first human being. Your enemy in this generation could very well have been your sibling in a previous one. The Talmud teaches Adam was created alone so that no one could say, my ancestor was greater than yours. We are all ultimately connected. We need to be both particularistic and universal in our approach to Holocaust education and anti-Semitism today. We need to be particularistic in fostering and deepening our Jewish identity with knowledge and pride, and we need to be universal in our concern with all civil and human rights. May we all stand this day, just as the high priest did thousands of years ago. May we all take responsibility for ourselves, our communities, and our nation. How can we, you and I, both deepen and become more public and proud of our Jewish identity? Let us re-examine what we are teaching the next generation. We need to do more. Grounded in our tradition, as we are on this day, the holiest day of the year, may we use our Judaism as an anchor to meet others authentically and to change the world. On behalf of myself and my family, I wish you a year inscribed in a book of life well lived, filled with health, love, and blessing.